The temperature in Roanoke, Virginia, had not broken 40 degrees by Tuesday morning in late November, and the sky above the Blue Ridge was the flat gray of a day that has decided to stay that way. When Sergeant Marcus Cole turned his transport van onto Garfield Street in southeast Roanoke at 10 past 9, in the passenger seat, Ada pressed one paw to the window glass. Not alert. Not alarm. The specific gesture she made when something on the other side of the glass required her attention in a way that was neither urgent nor casual. The way she pressed her paw to the glass at the VA waiting room when someone in the parking lot needed more time before they came inside. Through the windshield, at the pale yellow house on the corner with the rosebush cut back for winter, Marcus could see through the storm door glass. A burgundy scarf with small white diamonds, hanging on the hook inside, worn thin at the edges in the way of something kept for a very long time. He knew the scarf, what Marcus Cole understood in the next 4 seconds, and what he spent the next 2 days making right, would return a debt 28 years in the making, and save a woman's home for a reason she would not discover until he told her. If this is your first story on this channel, subscribe before we go any further. Marcus Cole was 40 years old and had done 4 tours across 15 years. Iraq, Afghanistan, Iraq again, Afghanistan again, and had come home to Roanoke 18 months ago with the specific intention of doing useful work in the city where he had grown up. Because Roanoke was where his mother was, and where Deon Watts had grown up, and where Marcus had learned, at 12 years old, standing outside a convenience store on a November night with nothing, that the world was capable of being different from what it had been. It had grown up in and out of the foster system, which was not a dramatic fact by the time he was an adult. It was simply the shape his childhood had taken. He was not bitter about it. It had turned it into the particular understanding of someone who has needed help, and received it and now knew what it cost to give and what it meant to withhold. It worked dispatch coordination for a veterans transportation nonprofit, scheduling rides for elderly veterans and their families, doing the pickup runs himself when the volunteer drivers were short, keeping the operation running in the specific way of someone who believes that the gap between a person and the care they need is often nothing more complicated than a ride. Deon Watts had grown up 3 blocks from Marcus and had enlisted 6 months before him, and had been in the same unit, and had died in Fallujah in 2005 at 22 years old. And Marcus had been 10 yards away when it happened, which was close enough to know it was over, and too far away to change anything, and had been living with that specific geometry for 20 years. Deon's grandmother had been a nurse at Roanoke Memorial for 30 years. Before the last mission, Deon had said to Marcus, in the particular offhand way of men who are saying the things they most believe, "My grandmother always said you pay people back by paying forward. You don't get to choose who. You just have to do it." Marcus had not known then what shape the paying forward would take. He was beginning to understand. Ada was a 6-year-old Doberman Pinscher, 68 pounds, retired from a private security firm that had described her temperament shift as no longer suited to the work. What had happened was that Ada had become, over 4 years of professional guarding, more interested in the people she was guarding than the perimeters she was supposed to watch. She leaned toward them. She stayed near them without being told. She went to the person in any room who was most alone and sat with them until they were not alone anymore. The security firm had found this inconvenient. Marcus had found it essential. She had been at the VA waiting room 3 times this month. All 3 times, she had gone directly to the person who was sitting at the farthest chair from the door and sat down beside them and stayed. And all 3 times Marcus had looked up from the check-in paperwork to find that the person was crying quietly, which they had not been doing before Ada arrived, which meant she had not caused the crying, but had made it possible, which was its own kind of work. It had told Ada about Deon once, on a drive back from a late pickup, the way you tell a dog the things you have not told other people. She had put her head on his forearm while he was driving, which was impractical and which he had not asked her to stop. The name on Tuesday's pickup sheet was Evelyn Marsh. The address was the pale yellow house on Garfield Street. The appointment was a medical follow-up at Carilion Roanoke Community Hospital at 10:30. Ann Marcus had been to that hospital 100 times on transport runs and had never once thought about the fact that his client list contained retired nurses from the ER, where, 28 years ago, a woman in a hospital badge and a burgundy scarf had sat with him on a bench and given him her last dollar, and waited with him until someone official arrived. He had not made that connection because he had not known her name. He had been 12. He had known. Gray-haired, kind, hospital badge, scarf with white diamonds. He had thought about her every November since. He had never known how to find her. He had not been trying to find her on a Tuesday morning in November. He had been doing a pickup. Ada had her paw on the glass before he finished parking. Evelyn Marsh opened the inner door in a hospital cardigan and reading glasses, in the specific efficiency of a woman who has spent 41 years in emergency nursing and for whom the relationship between time and action is not theoretical. She was 77 years old, small and precise, with white hair and a face that had the lines of a person who has been paying close attention to the world for a very long time. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Ada. Ada sat down on the welcome mat. She had not been asked. She had decided. Well, Evelyn said. She looked at the dog for a moment, and something in her expression went from the brisk composure of a woman managing a Tuesday morning to something quieter. The way it goes when an animal has done something you didn't expect that speaks directly to the part of you that was tired. Come in. The front room of Evelyn's house told Marcus two things before he had finished walking in. The first was that this was a home built over decades, with the specific intention of a person who expected to stay in it. Bookshelves covering two walls, a reading chair by the window positioned for the morning light, photographs on every surface, a garden visible through the back window where the raised beds were put to bed for winter but not abandoned, covered in straw and labeled with small painted stakes. The second thing was the boxes. Half the room was already packed, not casually, systematically, labeled in a hand that was not Evelyn's, stacked along the far wall in the organized way of a professional packing service. Her books were in boxes. Her plants were in boxes, or what had been her plants before. Someone put them in boxes and the light stopped reaching them. The photographs of a man Marcus assumed was Leonard were in a moving crate with the packing paper visible at the top. Evelyn was living in her own home surrounded by boxes she had not packed. Ada went to the kitchen table. She circled once, went to the far side, and sat down beside a piece of paper on the floor. A letter, face down, that had apparently slid from the table edge and fallen behind the leg, and that Ada had found by the specific method of a dog who notices things on the floor. Marcus picked it up. Virginia Tech, Roanoke Extension, Master Gardener Emeritus Program, acceptance letter, dated 18 months ago. He set it on the table where Evelyn could see it, and Evelyn saw it and went still the way people go still when something they have been keeping from someone has surfaced without their intention. I haven't told Bridget about that, she said. Why? Marcus asked. She looked at the boxes. Because she would use it as proof that I'm managing fine and don't need to go to Charlotte. She paused. And I am managing fine. And I don't need to go to Charlotte. Marcus looked at the acceptance letter. He looked at the moving boxes. He looked at Evelyn, who was standing in the middle of her packed living room, with her reading glasses on, and the particular expression of a woman who has been told repeatedly that a decision has been made for her, and who is still, at 77, not willing to agree that it was hers to make. He sighed. When does the truck come? Saturday morning, she said. 8 o'clock. He looked at the scarf on the hook by the door. He had been looking at it since he walked in the way of someone who keeps returning to a thing they have not yet accounted for. The scarf was burgundy, with small white diamonds worn thin at the collar fold. It was not new. It was not even middle-aged. It was the scarf of something kept for a very long time, for reasons that were not about warmth. He said, "How long have you had that scarf?" Evelyn turned to look at it. Something moved across her face. Not surprise, but the particular quality of being asked the right question at an unexpected time. 28 years or so, she said. She looked at him. Why? Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I was 12 years old, a boy outside a convenience store on a cold night. You were on your way home from a late shift. You gave him your last dollar and your scarf, and you sat with him until someone came. The room was very quiet. Evelyn looked at Marcus Cole. She looked at the specific construction of his face. Not a child's face, but a face that had once been a child's. The way faces are always both the thing they were and the thing they became. And something happened in her expression that was not recognition exactly, Because 28 years is too long for recognition, but was the thing that precedes it when the understanding arrives before the specific memory. She put one hand on the back of the reading chair. She said, I remember a boy. Have you ever done something small for a stranger and then forgotten it? Not because it didn't matter, but because you didn't know how to keep track of all the small things. And you did them because they needed doing? If someone like that came to mind just now, tell me about them in the comments. They deserve to be remembered. It gave her the ride to the medical appointment, and they talked on the way. And on the way back, Anis stayed for the cup of coffee she offered because it was the right thing to do, and because Ada had installed herself at Evelyn's feet in the reading chair position and showed no intention of leaving. Evelyn told him about Leonard, who had died at 69 of a heart that had been tired longer than it had let on. She told him about 41 years in the ER and the specific education it provides. You learn who people are when everything has been stripped away, which is not always what they expect it to be, and which is sometimes better and sometimes not, but it's always true. She told him about Bridget, not with complaint, but with the careful honesty of a mother who loves her daughter and understands her daughter's fear and cannot accept the shape that fear has taken. She's moving me because she's afraid of what happened to her father, Evelyn said. I understand that. I was afraid of it too. But Leonard died in his own house, in his own bed, the way he wanted to. That's not something I need to protect Bridget from. That's something she needs to understand. Marcus told her about Deon, which was the thing he told her when he had run out of his own words. About Roanoke and the unit and Fallujah and the grandmother who was a nurse. It told her what Deon had said about paying forward and about the 28 years he had spent turning that over without quite knowing where to put it down. It did not tell her that he was still, at 40, not sure how to receive things. He had not found the words for that yet. Ada put her chin on Evelyn's knee. Evelyn put her hand on Ada's head. Neither of them said anything for a moment. You turned out all right, Evelyn said. Marcus said nothing, but something in his chest that had been a certain shape for a long time shifted slightly. It called a property and elder law attorney in Roanoke that afternoon, a woman named Renata Hollis, who had been on the nonprofits resource list for 2 years and who, when Marcus described the situation, said, a healthcare POA does not authorize a residential relocation decision. That's not a medical decision. It's a life decision, and it requires Evelyn's direct consent. Was she given meaningful opportunity to refuse? Marcus said she had been told, not asked. Renata sighed. I can file an emergency hold on the moving company contract tomorrow morning pending review of the POA scope. Can Evelyn seen an authorization for me to act on her behalf? Marcus said he would ask. He drove back to Garfield Street and he asked. Evelyn signed. If you were in Marcus's position right now, having found her, having seen the boxes, knowing Saturday was in 2 days, would you have made the same calls? Type yes or no in the comments. I read every one. Breach Marsh arrived on Friday evening and found her mother's front room exactly as it had been. Boxes along the wall, packing done, everything ready. She found Evelyn at the kitchen table. She found Marcus Cole in the chair by the window, and Ada at Evelyn's feet, and Reverend Addie from Mount Moriah Baptist, seated at the end of the table with a cup of tea she had made herself because she knew where the cups were after 30 years of knowing this house. She found a neighbor named Patricia, who had lived across the street for 22 years and who had brought a casserole that was still warm on the counter. Bridget looked at the room. She looked at her mother. She sighed with the voice of a daughter who has been managing something from a distance for 2 years. Mom, the truck is coming tomorrow at 8. Ada did not growl. The sound that came from her was lower than a growl, the sustained quiet note of a Doberman who has assessed a situation and found it wanting. The sound that says, this is not going to proceed in the direction it is currently headed. She put herself between Evelyn's chair and the kitchen entrance, without drama, without command, in the way that a dog, who has been paying attention to rooms for 6 years, knows exactly where she needs to be. Bridget looked at the dog. She looked at Marcus. She sat still carefully. I appreciate the concern, but this is a family decision, and I never said I was ready. 5 words. Evelyn said them in the particular voice of a woman who has been an emergency nurse for 41 years. The voice that does not perform, that does not seek response. That simply states the truth of the situation with the flat authority of someone who knows the difference between a patient who has made peace with something and a patient who has had peace imposed on. Tim, you arranged this, Evelyn said. You scheduled the movers and reserved the apartment, and you told me it was happening. I said I wasn't sure. I said I needed more time. You said we'd talk about it. She looked at her daughter with the clear, unhurried eyes of a woman who loves the person she is looking at and needs her to understand something. You never came back to talk about it. Bridget's hand, at her side, went still. Ada had not moved. Her weight was forward. Her eyes were on Bridget. Marcos said, Renata Hollis has filed an emergency hold on the moving contract pending review of the healthcare POA scope. A residencial relocation is not a medical decision. It requires Evelyn's direct, uncoerced consent, which she has not given. The contract will be reviewed on Monday. He kept his voice at the register he had used all week. Not hard, not soft. The register of someone who has spent 15 years in situations that required him to be precise. But before Monday, you and your mother need to have a conversation you've been putting off since Leonard died. Bridget looked at Reverend Addie, who looked back at her with the patient expression of a woman who has been sitting with people through the hardest conversations of their lives for 20 years. She looked at Patricia, who had been Evelyn's neighbor for 22 years, and who had one thing to say: Your mother planted every rosebush on this block, Patricia said. She brought soup when every one of us was sick. She shoveled the Hendersons' walk for 3 winters after Harold's hip. She has lived in this neighborhood for 31 years. This is where she belongs. She paused. That's not a medical opinion. That's just the truth. Bridget looked at her mother. Something moved on her face that Marcos recognized. It was not shame. It was something more like the arrival of a fact that had been present for a long time and had just been named for what it was. The fact was this: she had been making a decision from fear, not from love, and she had dressed it in the language of love, and her mother had known the difference. She sat down at the kitchen table across from Evelyn. She said, and her voice was different now, I was so afraid of what happened to Dad. Evelyn reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. I know, she said. I was too. He died at home, Bridget, in his own bed. You think that was bad? It wasn't bad. It was exactly right. She held her daughter's hand. Don't take that away from me. Ada left the kitchen entrance and walked to Bridget's side and sat down, which was the thing Ada did when a person had become, in Ada's assessment, someone who needed to be sat with. Bridget looked at the dog beside her. She looked at her mother's hand. On her hand, she stayed for dinner. The moving contract was voided on Monday morning following Renata Hollis's review. The healthcare POA was amended to exclude residential decisions not arising from medical necessity. With Evelyn's consent, the apartment in Charlotte was canceled. The packers came back on Wednesday and unpacked every box, and Evelyn repotted her plants the following morning and put them back in the south window, where the light was right. The Virginia Tech's Master Gardener Emeritus program began in March, as scheduled. Evelyn attended the first session with a notebook she had kept in the bottom drawer for 2 years, waiting for the right use, and she came home and called Bridget to tell her about it. And Bridget listened for 40 minutes, which was longer than she had listened to her mother about anything in years. Bridget drove up from Charlotte in April. She stayed for a weekend, and they worked in the garden together. Not because either of them had decided to, but because Saturday morning arrived, and the raised beds needed turning, and Evelyn was already out there, and Bridget put on borrowed gloves and joined her, and that was the arrangement. And it turned out to be enough. Marcos drove past Garfield Street on his transport runs through that fall and winter and into the spring. Not always stopping, sometimes just slowing down to see whether the rosebush was coming back. It was, every time. There are debts that cannot be repaid, not because the debtor is unwilling, but because the nature of the debt is not transactional. A woman on her way home from a late shift had given a boy her last dollar and her scarf and 45 minutes of her time. And that boy had grown into a man who had spent 28 years trying to understand what to do with what she had given him. And the answer, it turned out, was this: not to pay it back to her, but to keep paying it forward, and to arrive, eventually, on her doorstep at exactly the right moment, with a Doberman who knew which chair to sit beside. Deon Watts had said, "You don't get to choose who. You just have to do it." He had been right. This story is for everyone who was kind to a stranger once, who gave something small on a cold night and never knew what it grew into. And for everyone who has been that stranger, who received something they didn't ask for and didn't know what to do with, except become someone who gave it back. Is there someone in your life who did something small for you at exactly the right moment? Who didn't know they were changing the direction of things? Tell me about them in the comments. I read every one. And this section fills with the names of people who deserve to be thanked. Every story on this channel is about what happens when kindness comes back around. If that means something to you, subscribe so you're here for the next one. There are more stories to tell. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.